Hey everyone, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on building the community. I'm your host, Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Yep, I'm feeling legendary today.
All
This is
right,
my
so
thing. I'm gonna do it now.
that's your thing. Have
Yep.
we figured it out? Well, we'll see if the community likes it or not. Certainly tell us in the comments. But today, besides talking about that being legendary, we're going to focus on this is continuing our series about onboarding players to Warhammer: The Old World. So in previous episodes, we had talked about, hey, how do you pick an army that you're excited and passionate about, and one that you want to play. In another segment, we then walked you through how do I build a list? What is a list? How do I go through the book and figure that out? So let's assume you've gone through those first few steps, and now we're on to all right. Before you're playing the game, you need to put your models together. So Evan, let's assume you bought a starter box and you're going to put some models together for the sake of our conversation for fun. What starter box did you buy, Evan?
I bought the High Elf starter box. There we go. That's topical.
Okay, high elf starter box. That's a good one. So, for a lot of you table gamers out there, you will be tabletop veterans, which is great. But for a lot of people, there are new people, absolutely, who are diving into Old World, and this is their first tabletop game. And we are very excited to have you join the community and dive in. So this video is definitely to help some of you, and maybe some veterans out there who love to play a lot of games, but maybe the hobby side of it not so focused on, and that's okay too. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you begin your journey into tabletop gaming and into Warhammer: The Old World. It is a journey, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay. You're going to like different things at different times. There's some people who have been playing for a very long time and they absolutely love playing the game. It's their favorite thing. Some of them love going to events and competing to try and win that best general. Some people just love hanging out with their friends because they're just, beer and pretzels, are right, hanging out in the garage, playing a game, and that's great. Other people are really focused on the hobby side. They love collecting, or they love assembling the models, or displaying them on the shelf, or painting, right? And there's a whole spectrum there, and there is no wrong answer here, right? If you're
So
engaging
wait,
with the
wait, Mike.
community,
So you're saying I'm on the
what?
spectrum? Is that what you're saying?
You're on a lot of things, but we're going to put that to the side uh, for right now. So it is totally cool, and in fact, actually, it's pretty common that people will change over time. I know when I first started playing quite a while ago, some years, decades ago, painting was really hard. For me, really challenging when I was a kid. I think it was around 14 when I started, and I just didn't have the discipline or the training to do these things, and the tools back then were not as good as they are now or as accessible. But certainly, the longer I've played this hobby, I've definitely learned from a lot of talented people. YouTube has incredible videos out there, and I've wanted to level up my painting skills over time, and that is a journey that I've been going through. Right? What about yourself, Evan? What's been your journey? How much have you focused on hobby versus not hobby? Would you say over the years?
Well, I spent the majority of my hobby time for the first, I don't know, 17 years I was playing this game to just building models and armies that I
Mm-hmm,
hoped to one day play against somebody. And now I have
mm-hmm.
9 old world armies in some
A
various
lot.
levels of setup. Yeah, so
Yeah,
a
still
lot.
missing a few. And that's okay. But I think the main thing that wherever you are on what you're trying to get out of this, it's good to understand where you're at. And if you're a new player, a new painter, new to just hobbying in general, you're gonna make mistakes. That's okay. But we at least want to help you out here, get started, walk you through the process. Because one thing that is important to all people playing the game is at least that you have the models represented on the table. There are definitely a lot of communities out there. Everyone prefers to see painted, beautiful armies. That's why we're playing a tabletop game, right? Why we're
Mm-hmm.
not using tokens is right. It's a 3D game with models, right, and the soldiers and seeing them arrayed on the battlefield. It's just so awe-inspiring and immersive.
Yeah.
And Not everybody's going to be a top tier painter, and that's totally cool. And there's all sorts of tutorials on how to get started with battle ready and such. But we're not focused on painting just yet. You do need to assemble your models though. This
Right.
is going to be an expectation pretty much with every community out there. Now, some people definitely will let you proxy some models temporarily as you're ramping up or let you borrow from some friends. But the main thing is you do have the appropriate models and they are on the appropriate size bases that so that you can play the game. That is an expectation. So at a minimum, you at least need to assemble them. So you bought your high elf starter set and you open up the box. What would you expect to see in that box, Evan, as a starter box?
My guess would be about 45 different plastic sprues that are all about this big, and they have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different parts on them. And then you need to figure out, okay, so this was an army box. So some of these parts are for specific units, and some of them are for other units. And then you're going to have
Mhm.
several different pamphlets in there that are different, explanations for how to put them together. But you might actually have to do some guesswork to figure out which parts go to which kit, right? Because you got multiple kits in there.
Yep. So that's the starting point, right?
Yeah,
The good thing is, Games Workshop today, their skill at assembling the instruction booklets on how to assemble the models are really top notch.
yeah,
Are they perfect? No, but they're quite good. And also keep in mind, if you ever get stuck assembling a model, you're not sure. There's tons of online references, other materials, people who will show you how to build specific units and such if you get stuck. So don't feel like it's not everything is crystal clear. While they're a lot better than they used to be, it's no different than the first time you have to, repair something on your car or change a tire or build a computer or something else, right? Once you've done it one or two times, you really got it down, but the first time can be a little intimidating. So check out those instruction booklets. A great first start is to organize the plastic sprues,
yeah,
right? Those rectangles with all the bits on them. Put them in the appropriate piles of the units that they go with, and definitely want to focus on. I'd recommend one unit at a time. So pick whether you're picking. Maybe don't start with your general, right? The most premier or elite unit. Maybe start with some rank and file soldiers. That if you make some mistakes on them, it's not going to be as frustrating having to fix some of those mistakes or having some slight damage you might have to repair over later. So that's where you'd start with. So you figure out, organize them,
yeah.
figure out the sprue of the unit you want to put together. Open the instruction booklet for that. I would encourage you. There's only so many pages for that unit. Do a quick glance through it just once. Just it's no different than IKEA furniture, right? You want to go through it at least once because you might see there's a step three or four or three quarters of the way in that you didn't realize was a part that looked just as similar to later. Just do a quick flip through when you get started.
Yeah.
So beyond that, Evan, you have your sprues, you've organized them, you picked your unit, you're going to assemble, you have the instructions. What are the basic tools you need to move forward now?
Okay, so the main one is essentially these clippers here. So they look kind of like this. You have the essentially modeling clippers. They're sharp and they have a straight edge, so that you can kind of align that against the model, so that you can kind of slice straight against away from the sprue, and then you can pick
Mhm.
out those little pieces out of the sprue, and then use those pieces to then finally assemble the model. So the clippers is kind of the first thing you need.
Yep, clippers are great. Now we're looking at the Games Workshop website here. They sell
Yep.
some clippers, and they are good quality clippers. I've had some of them myself. That again, Games Workshop supplies. They do have some great supplies. You are going to be paying a higher price typically than some of the other hobby supplies. So there are a lot of places you can get clippers, though. The
Yep.
GW ones are good, but you could also go to Hobby Lobby. You could go to Michael's. You could buy some online. There's a lot of different places where you can get them, and they're all fairly standard in terms of those sharp edges. And the main thing is when you are clipping out your bits to assemble your model, as Ed said, you want to have the flat edge as flush against it as you can. So because it will do, you want as little of the what you're cutting off to remain on the model, and you want to make sure that you're clipping it with a sharp clip. You don't want to tug and pull. If you're tugging and pulling, that means you didn't slice it and you didn't clip it, and therefore you're going to break things or bend things unintentionally. So make sure
Yeah.
you're careful with that. And again, do some practice first and get comfortable with it. Also, be careful when you're clipping off. Typically, the bit you're clipping off will have multiple points on it, and you have to clip multiple points off. So you have to rotate your clippers around it to make sure the flat edge is
Yeah.
always flush around where you're clipping. And when it's the last bit you're clipping off, make sure you're not clipping it really hard and whoo, it goes flying off somewhere into the room. So be careful about, if you need to hold your hand or a paper towel over it, or maybe don't clip so hard. It's also great. The starter box you have, great thing to assemble things in. Clip the sprue in the box itself, the lid of the box, so that typically if it goes shoots off to a side, it's a good deep box. It will hit the edge and stay in the box. That's also I've done that before. I see a lot of people do that. So really good way to do that. So you clip out all the bits. Now, Evan, do you clip out every single bit for the unit when you're assembling it? I mean, you certainly can, but what's typically your process?
So that's a fun question because a lot of units, a lot of kits, like old world kits, will have actually two ways to build them. Like let's say you had the dwarf iron breaker slash iron drake kits, and so they'll have arms for hand weapons and shield arms, but then you don't use those at all for the iron drakes. You use the hand that holds the drake gun and then the hand that then holds up the other side of it, and so you'll end up with a lot of extra pieces. The other thing that's really common to have extras of is, for example, heads. So if you're having like an
Hmm.
orcs and goblins kit, there's generally like 5 or 6 heads for every like 4 actual bodies. So you'll have plenty of extra
Hmm.
heads to then, in theory, you're choosing which ones you want to have on those models. So
Yeah, so two
when
different
you're
concepts there.
yeah, yeah, the two different concepts are, first of all, sometimes the kit has come with two totally different ways to build it, and other times it's
Hmm.
more that there is a dynamic number of pieces. So there's kind of those core, like the legs and the torso. Maybe there's just one of those per each guy, but then there's plenty of extra arms, heads, armor bits. Sometimes you're going to glue on a little like shoulder pad, things of that nature.
Yeah, so the ones that are just aesthetic choices, it's really you as the consumer, right? The hobbyist, which ones do you like? And Evan gave an example of the various heads. Maybe you like the heads that have more of a beard. Maybe you like the ones with more scars. They'll typically offer you some variety, and you're just choosing. You'll end up with some extra bits, which you'll store. Don't throw them out. Store them in a bits box or baggie or whatever your sorting method
Yeah.
is for that. But then that is an old world specific thing, because more of the other Games Workshop games, you typically buy a unit. They come with one set of gear, and that's the only set of gear they have. Old World is not like that. Old World has a lot of options. We talked about this with your army construction. Maybe my unit can have shields. Maybe it can have great weapons. Maybe it can have spears, right? And there will be those weapons and armor variations, the loadouts you can give them will all be on the sprue. So you will eventually clip them all out, and this is something you can plan in advance. Now, different people approach this different ways. Again, I don't feel that there's a right or wrong way to do this. There's just different approaches to it. Some people like to clip out all the potential weapon option loadout things for that unit, the great weapon and the shield and the hand weapon and the gun, and they'll glue them all on them. So they'll say, well, he's holding his shield here and his hand weapon here, and they'll glue the two-handed weapon on his back, and then the pistol across his belt. And you know what? That's fine. If they want to do that, good for them. They're your models. You need to love them. Make them cool. Make them your unit that you love. And if you love hitting them out, then go for it, right? Again, the community, at least the community that we're promoting and encouraging, are very open to, as long as the model is clearly representing what it's supposed to represent, you're good to go. The actual very specific loadout, it has to be the exact same weapon, is just not feasible with the variety of different loadouts. And that's a really fun part about Old World. You get to customize the unit, and you're gonna, you know what, change your opinion from game to game. Sometimes you want this loadout, sometimes you want that loadout, and that will change many, many times. But you're only going to assemble this model once. So that's one method. Another method, Evan, tell us about the magnet method. The people who love magnets. This is more
Oh
advanced. I do
God,
not recommend this for new
yeah.
people, but it is a thing we want to at least acknowledge.
So this is a little bit more common with 40k, especially because in Warhammer 40k the guns are a bit more dynamic. For example, like you have
Mm-hmm.
like a Tau crisis suit. I personally drilled and then magnetized a whole bunch of different weapons onto my Tau crisis suit models. But in old world it would be, for example, magnetizing like whether you had a shield or a great weapon or something of that nature. However, I think that it's pretty rare nowadays for people to do that for
Yeah.
things like old world, because you can always just say, well, they count as having this thing. You don't need to do that.
And your opponent's going to be totally cool with it, so don't stress about that. And so you can do the whole magnet thing if you really want to. I do not personally recommend it. I'm sure there are people out there who love it and would recommend it, and I'd encourage you to maybe go watch some of their videos and
Yeah,
see what they're doing. I don't recommend it because, one, it's very easy to make a mistake. Two, both by drilling through the wrong thing or clipping something out you didn't intend, or to get the magnets on the wrong polarity and it doesn't stick, which is super mad once
yeah,
you super glued it in. And also, quite frankly, it's really easy when playing a game to accidentally bump a model and that part fall off, and
yes.
it's gone forever, and you'll never find it.
Yeah, and I think so. The basic process is you take the part you want to magnetize, you drill a hole that has to be at least like a millimeter or two wide to then stick a little magnet you've purchased in there. Now most pieces like this, they're hollow, so you can drill through the outside, and then you have to somehow get the little magnet to like float flush in that hole without falling into the inner cavern of the model, right? So then you have to float it flush, glue it that way, and then you have to then do the same thing to the other end so that they meet. And you'll do this whole process and then realize, oh, they're the wrong polarity, so they repel instead of attracting.
Yep.
So
So you can do it. It's not something we'd recommend. So you can, and then the third method, which is I believe the most common one, people just say, I like this loadout of the way this looks with these models. I like them with great weapons, and so I'm gonna pose them all and use the arms where he's holding two hands of the great weapon. Or I like them with shields, and they're just gonna model them with one set of the weapons it comes with, and they're like, "Yeah, I love this unit. I love this model. It looks awesome." And then when we're playing a game, Evan will just tell me, "Oh, Mike, this spearman unit here that's wearing spears, they actually just have hand weapons." And I'll go, "Okay, cool." And then we're good to go, and it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because pretty much, the goal is to have an awesome community that's not going to get fixated on that thing. And that is my favorite method personally. It's the method I would like to promote in the community. Is let people make the cool models look the way they want to look, as long as it clearly is representing the unit. In this case, in Evan's case, it was an elven soldier unit, and whether they had spears or not, he just told me when we deployed the unit on the battlefield and we're good to go.
Yeah. So another step you'll do with some of these older kits is you'll remove mold lines. So the way that these plastic basically parts are made is there's an injection mold. So there's kind of the master mold, and then they
Mm-hmm.
spray the plastic as it's melting like into there, seal it, and then once it's dried, they release the mold, and now you have this kit. Well, because there's two pieces of the mold, top and bottom, there can be a seam around the outside of the parts. So you'll see a little trim, or even potentially like kind of like a dorsal fin sticking out of something. So you basically use a hobby knife to cut and carve along that side to remove it. Now, this can actually be a lot easier to remove while it's still on the sprue. So you can hold on to the sprue while you're doing it instead of trying to hold on to potentially a very fragile model like the arm of some guy to then carve the mold line off of him. You can just do it while it's on the sprue before you've cut it out.
Yep, and you'll see these, just to be clear, this is not specific to tabletop gaming. This is just plastic injection of anything. You can see this on shoes or Crocs. You can see this on action figures and toy soldiers at the Target or whatever,
Yeah.
right? So mold lines are a very common thing. But again, for aesthetics reasons, obviously we want to try and remove mold lines as much as possible. There's now these modern mold line removers, which are great because they're very effective. All right, so as we said, the mold lines aren't specific to tabletop gaming or even to Warhammer. You could see this with shoes, with Crocs, or you could see this with action figures at stores. You'll see this with other things. It's just that part of the process of that injection process. And so basically, you just want to scrape the side of the model to gently remove the mold line. You don't want to gouge or gash or destroy the model, which is why these more modern mold line remover tools are great because they got those nice angles, and typically you're not going to stab yourself with these. There's really great tools. I do recommend them. I'm definitely old school though. Before these tools existed, in terms of just getting an X-Acto blade, on the smaller ones, the angled ones that you use to cut paper and things and other things with, and it just blunted up a little bit, so reduce the stabbing myself factor on that by scraping across some wood or some other things like that, and then I'll just scrape the side of that to get the mold lines off. But both are very effective, and I would encourage you to remove the mold lines, and you'll see a lot less of them on the newer kits because they've gotten really great at the process, and so there's very few mold lines versus some of the older kits. You're going to see more of those.
Yeah. And just, you might be opening this box and seeing all the things in there. Occasionally they come with transfer sheets. They look like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're decals, and just so you know, you're not going to use these for a while because you're going to put these on only after you're done painting and possibly also matte varnishing them. And the way that these work is that you cut out the decal you want, and then you basically lay it in I forget if it's the microset or the microsol, because one of them is the solvent. You lay it in
Mm-hmm.
there, and then it starts to allow the transfer to then float away from the paper. And you use a brush with some of the microsol on it to then push it onto the flat section of the model and allow it to kind of float onto the section where you want it to be. Like if it's the shoulder pad of the Space Marine, or if it's the banner that you're trying to put that on there, you're kind of floating it to the middle, and when you have it in the place you want it, you put the microset on top, and it kind of hardens and stays that way. And it's a great way to add these kind of fine details to things, like for example banners. But you're going to do that much later.
Yeah, do that later. But it is worth pointing out that the kit in even Games Workshop doesn't. Do they sell the microset microsol? I don't know that they do. That's a
I
different
don't think they
product.
do. Yeah, so you actually
No,
have to go to a different place to get this
you
stuff that I'm talking about.
technically can do this with water,
Yeah.
and but it's a slower process and more prone to mistakes. But there are specific materials, a clear container bottles that you can buy that Evan just talked about. Microset Microsol, highly recommend it if you're going to do decals. It makes the process so much easier, and look those up if you're going to use them at some point. But again, as Evan said, this is after the painting process. This is
Yeah.
one of the last steps, if not the last step, that you would do when using your model. So put those to the side. Don't put them where they're going to get crunched or smashed, or no, I folded or sat on it or something, put it on a shelf or something, so it's going to stay flat and safe and ready to go when you're ready to use them.
Yeah,
Keep it out of the sun too.
and just to bring up, so why there's a drill here. So there's kind of two main reasons. So for things like in Warhammer 40k, occasionally you want to like drill out the gun barrels so that the barrels will be hollow, because the models will be like solid there. Or for example, in fantasy, if you want to then pin something. So pinning is where you drill into, like, let's say the arm socket of one piece, and then you can then put a metal pin onto the opposing side, so that then as they join, it's not a flat surface. There's kind of a pin going in there. You generally only need to do this for very large, heavy metal pieces. So for example,
Yeah,
I think maybe in Old World there's not as many of these because they've been replaced with resin, which is a lot easier
not
to
many
actually
left.
work with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the old metal wyvern was really hard to get the wings to not fall off, because where they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to connect, super glue is not as strong as a connection as something like a plastic glue. So we haven't really talked about this yet, but when you connect these plastic kits, you have to use, or you should be using, plastic glue to fuse the pieces together. What it does
Well,
is
let's
it
talk about the three
melts.
materials first.
Yeah,
So, right. So you mentioned
yeah,
metal.
yeah.
Those are you unlikely you will find those in the starter kit. They do sell, and you won't find metal with Warhammer 40k or with Age of Sigmar, but there are
Not
some
anymore.
older old world models that they will re-release or mail to order some old metal models. But again, those are very few and they're mostly phased out, and that's what the pinning is for. But again, very rare. But then there's also plastic and resin. So walk us through the difference of plastic and resin.
Yeah, so resin is essentially taking the same method that they use for like creating metal models, and they take a mold and they put the resin and they basically pour it in there until it hardens in that shape. So when you have resin, it's more fragile than plastic. A lot of people think that plastic is, not very durable. It's actually very durable for its weight and its size. A plastic piece is pretty strong and sturdy, and other materials that try to replicate it are not as durable. So you have to be
Big
careful with
fan
the
of the new
resin.
plastics.
Yeah,
There's a reason why everything's in plastic now, and it's not for cost savings. It's because the quality, the durability, and the flexibility. Plastic can bend versus the old days. You have a metal model, it falls off the table because you're playing games. You bump it, no, it shatters into a million pieces. Resin can also do that
oh,
too, but plastic is super durable even falling on concrete. Typically you'll get one break at most, if anything, and it's so much easier to repair.
yeah. Plastic also, so that's why you have basically most things with that, and that's, you have to use, or you should be using plastic glue to fuse plastic together. What plastic glue is doing, it's making the plastic start to melt, and then as it melts, it then molds together, and now that connection is not a friction surface where it can then snap away from each other as much, because it has actually melted and fused. And in fact, if
Mm-hmm.
you use plastic glue to glue your models onto plastic bases, it's a pain to get them off. So if you have old miniatures, or if you're buying them off eBay, for example, and they're on the wrong base size, it can be very difficult. And we'll probably have to have a whole video just talking about how to rebase models, because if they're plastic glued onto those bases, it is difficult to get them off of there. You'll have to like kind of do surgery to cut the base around them
Yeah.
sometimes.
So really
Um,
three materials:
yeah, and
plastic, resin, and metal. In the starter box, you're
yeah,
probably only going to find plastic. You might find some resin depending on the box, but for the most part, plastic.
yeah, and then just to
Um,
point out, plastic glue does nothing to resin or metal. So if you have a resin or metal model, you have to be using super glue to get them to go together. You can hold it there forever with the plastic glue. It's water;
won't
it
work.
does nothing.
Yeah, so big fan of the plastic glue, but obviously only applicable to plastic. And as Evan said, it does melt it, so it's super durable. But it's great in my because it's not like super glue where you're going to get it on your finger and then it will soak into your skin and destroy your skin. Again, please be careful with any glue. Different people's skin will be sensitive to different materials more so than others, right? So while the plastic glue won't burn my skin, it could burn your skin. So please be careful when using any of these materials and making sure you're not allergic to it or going to have a nasty reaction to it. So plastic glue is great for that. It gives you more time to set the model, and it does very quickly, does do its job, and it holds very durable. And it's my favorite medium if when putting plastic models together. You can use super glue. You have to use super glue for metal models or resin models. You can use it for plastic models. Some people prefer to do that intentionally because they are concerned they're going to make a mistake or they want to snap off something later. I know people that do this. It's not as common. I don't recommend it. And when they're going to do that, hey, they want to put on, like I said, that two-handed arm, and this is a fourth method we didn't talk about now. And they, at some point, if they want to put on a shield and something else, they'll literally take that model, put it in their freezer for a few hours, sometimes 24 hours,
Yeah.
because when it's really, really cold, it makes the super glue super brittle. They'll take it out of the freezer and then they can snap off those parts or from the base, as Evan said. So
Yeah.
to each their own. There is no wrong method here. Just be aware there are pros and cons to what you're using and make sure you do some research. But for the most part, new player, getting started, putting some models together, you need your clippers, you need some sort of mold line removal tool, X-Acto blade or a mold line remover, and then plastic glue is great. You can buy the GW plastic glue. It's a glue. It's a good product. But again, other hobby stores sell that as well. That can be more cost effective as well. Personally, I really like buying the plastic glue. I forget the brand. I buy it online. But it has the metal pointed tip at the end because it's a very fine pointed tip, and so it's great for applying it just where you want it. Because some of the larger plastic caps, it can spread out more easily because it's very liquid and can run around
Yeah.
the model pretty quickly.
And plastic glue has a tendency to kind of get like hardened inside, like the metal needle that's kind of coming
Yep,
out of.
that's why you need a
Yeah.
needle. It comes with a
Well,
small wire to clean it.
well, that's one thing you can do. The other solution is that you hold it with some tongs, and then you take that little metal piece out of the plastic glue because plastic glue is flammable. Okay, so don't leave it in there. So you take the
No
metal piece
fire
out.
near any of this.
So
No
yeah,
fire.
but I'm saying you can take tongs, take this outside, okay, and you hold that little metal piece that has plastic glue frozen in there, and you take a lighter and you hold the lighter along that plastic metal piece, and with the heat on there, and it will melt and burn the plastic that's frozen in the inside of that metal tube. Um,
I do not recommend fire or using fire in any of this process. So if you're gonna try and do what Evan just said, please watch some YouTube videos. Please do it
yeah,
safely. I
get some
prefer to
diagrams.
just use the little wire it comes with. Please do not hurt yourself. All right, so we talked about getting the models, clipping them out, and again, I would encourage you to only clip out the one step at a time through the instructions.
Yeah, it's
Some
easy to lose
people like to
pieces if
clip
you
everything
clip out
out.
too
Oh,
much.
you lose pieces, or sometimes it's hard to identify pieces because some of them are very similar. Now, the great thing about the GW sprues is they will number the sprue. If you're like, well, is that this piece or this piece? And you look at the instructions, they'll have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 50, 60, whatever. And so you can look on the sprue and you know, oh, that's the part that goes with it. So I'd encourage you to do one step at a time, assemble it one step at a time. It reduces getting it wrong or making mistakes or losing parts. So, all right, so you've assembled your model. Ta-da! Now you need to put it on the base. They should come with bases. Sometimes the bases get damaged. Sometimes the sprues get damaged. So, mistakes happen. Contact GW. I've had personally a great track record with them where I had damaged product or missing bases. It's no different than buying something from IKEA. Sometimes the screw is missing or whatever. Right? These things happen. Right? And just get replacements for those. It will happen. And also keep in mind, keep these out of the sun. They will warp and melt in the sun and the heat. Do not leave them in your car. Do not
Yeah.
leave them in the back of your trunk. Do not leave them near windows, right? Even when they're fully painted. Right, you can still have them in a room like my room here. It can get up to 80, 90 degrees if the AC is not on or anything in the summer, but it's never in direct sunlight.
Yes.
So be aware they will warp permanently and be destroyed, effectively aesthetically ruined if they get near heat. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've assembled the models, you put it together, and now they're on the stands. You put your army together. We're not going to go into too detailed about painting, but you do before you paint it though. There's a pretty important step. What's that step?
So I think this is something that maybe is not as obvious, but you don't want to put paint directly onto the gray plastic model. You want to
No.
prime them all first and cover it all over. So the simplest method is to basically either cover them all in a matte black paint, like the Chaos Black here, for example, or to cover them all in a type of white, like White Scar, and then to start from there. It kind of depends on the type of painting style you're going to do. I think that starting with black is kind of the simplest method for beginners to use, depending on the way you're going to be painting. But you want to prime the models. Now, how are you going to do this? Well, it's actually can be difficult for people if you don't have access to an outdoor space like a backyard where you can do it with ventilation. That's gonna be a problem because you cannot do this inside. The amount
No.
of fumes that come off of a spray can when you spray it just for like 2 seconds is enough to set off your fire alarms and to make it not able to breathe in your room for hours.
You
So
can't. You have to
yeah,
find ventilation, and even if you have ventilation, Again, be aware it will affect different people in different ways. You might need to wear a mask or a rebreather, right? There's a reason why you see graffiti artists or things like that who, they wear these masks for a reason. These are the same type of chemicals, right? You do not want to breathe in these chemicals. You
Yeah.
do not want to. It's not going to. Again, unless you have an allergic reaction, you will get some on your skin sometimes. But again, you might be allergic to it, right? It might cause some problems. So please be careful with any chemical and when using this. And
Yeah.
you do need to find an outdoor space, a ventilated space. Even if you're in your garage and there's nothing in the garage, open that garage door.
Yep.
Make sure you are venting, right? Blow a
Yeah.
fan out.
So what I do is I take an old cardboard box from like a Amazon package. And I set that up as the backboard for all the spray that's going to miss the model to hit against, right? And then I will wear a nitrile glove over my left hand so that I don't get paint on my fingers while I hold my models or a tray of models or a row, for example, and then spray. You want a couple clean sprays about 4 or 5 inches away from the models, and you want to just back and forth like this in little bursts so that you don't stand there spraying on top of it until it's like total caked over, because you can overly remove those details from the model. I think something
Easily.
and something I think we've skipped over is you cannot spray paint in any and all weather. Okay,
No.
when you spray your models, first of all, your can, like if it's been left out and it's been very cold outside, you can't use it until your can has warmed up a little bit. So you can run it under some warm water under the sink, or
Room
you can just wait
temperature.
until it's a little bit warmer outside. But it needs to be around like 60, 65 degrees Fahrenheit and not be overly humid. Because if it's either
Mm-hmm.
really cold or overly humid, the paint particles in the spray can will be big and chunky. And when you spray it on there, it'll either leave these river-like cracks in the paint that have kind of fused and forced away from each other, or there will be dots and specks like it was covered in
Yeah.
snow. Kind of
So if you haven't done this before, again, there are a bunch of other tutorial videos out there from experts who can walk you through more of it. Don't just immediately get, because we all want to do it. I have a new unit. I want to go spray it. And then you didn't follow the steps. You haven't done this before, and you've kind of ruined your model because that primer is very hard to get off. There are stripping materials that you can get stuff
yeah.
off, but we're not going to go into that. It's very difficult. Please be careful. So again, make sure you're a good temperature, not too humid, properly ventilated. If you need hand protection gloves, I like to use pizza blocks, old pizza boxes. I like putting them on, so I'll hold it in one hand and then I'll spray with the other. Different people use different methods, right, in terms of what they're doing. The GW primer is actually, in my opinion, some of the best, if not the best primer on the market. Like, Mike, why can't I just buy cheaper primer other places?
Yeah,
Well, there's
yeah,
other tabletop brands of primer you could buy, such as Army Painter, and there's a whole bunch of others, and they are good. But you
yeah,
cannot just buy primer from the hardware store that cost a third of the price. The reason why is twofold. One, the quality of that primer is not meant for miniatures. So when you spray the primer, even GW primer, when you do it correctly on the model, it will look a little goopy. And it's covered and it's wet, right? But with a good primer, when it dries, it cures, it tightens up and gets really close to the model itself, and shrink, almost like a shrink wrap on it,
yeah,
which is what you want. You don't want to lose the detail of the model. As Evan said, if you spray too much, you're
yeah,
creating layers of that primer paint, and you're going to lose detail of the beautiful model, so you don't want that. If you buy the cheaper primer, it absolutely will not shrink and adhere as close to the model as primer specifically created by miniature companies for this purpose. So do not buy that cheap primer. The other thing to be careful of, the cheap primer, they often don't say it, often has a varnish in it. Even though it doesn't say it on the bottle. And so, because it's meant for like spraying outdoor furniture or other different things, and so you'll spray it, oh, it looks beautiful, and it cured, and it's shrunk, and it's great. And then you try and paint on top of it, oh, my paint's not sticking. Wasn't the whole point of the primer for the paint to stick? But
yeah,
there's actually was a varnish in that, so now the paint's not going to stick. It's meant to be outside and keep it durable. So do not use the um, miniature
right.
primers. You don't have to use the GW one, but again, personally, I've used a lot of the different ones. The GW one is more expensive, but the quality bar is very high, and I do recommend it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to be aware of is that most non-miniature spray paints are not a matte finish, and they're instead a glossy finish. And a glossy finish looks terrible on a miniature that's supposed to be looking realistic. So a gloss
Mm-hmm.
finish will make it look shiny, and when it's not supposed to be, and you do not want that either. So if you're
Yep.
getting any of these kind of paints, you always want to make sure, or at least be checking, that it would be a matte finish.
Yep. So we're not going to go into the colors too much, but there
Yeah,
are again definitely ways to save yourself time and efficiency with different colors that you want to use. Typically, the black and the white primers are where you would start from neutral palettes that you would build the paint layers on top of them. The colored primers are to save you some time if your army is primarily this one color. But again, other tutorial videos can take you
yeah.
through that. We're not going to go through the color theories here,
I
but
do
make
I
sure
do
you
really
shake up
like
the
Xandri
can.
dust though for like if you're doing skeletons or like
Mhm.
desert buildings, for example. Xandri dust is an amazing color.
Absolutely. Do make sure you shake up your rattle can
Yeah,
before you're using it right. I like to do 30 seconds upside down and 30 seconds top side up, generally speaking. Make sure you do some tests in the air. And again, make sure you test it on something, even if it's not the model, cardboard or something that you could throw an Amazon box or whatever to make sure it is coming out evenly and is not splotching. And again, if it is splotching, do not use it. Go watch the videos, go figure out what's wrong and make sure you fix the problem. And old primer does is no longer useful. Old primer at a certain point is no, just like paint or anything else. It can get to a point where it no longer has the chemical composition. It's deteriorated. You need to not use it. So, all right. So that's kind of just the high level. But so you prime the models because effectively you need the paint to stick to them, and
yes,
otherwise the paint will stick. It doesn't matter if it's metal, if it's plastic, if it's resin. If your model's made out of wood, you need to prime it in order for your paint to stick onto it. So you prime it, you let that cure. Different primers will, and depending on the conditions outside, will cure at different times, right?
yeah,
So that means, right, the paint's dry. So when you touch it with your fingers, it's not sticky. Do not touch it when it's sticky, or you will get a nice fingerprint right on the model where you picked it up with your fingers, and you're like, huh. That's not so smooth. I got a big old fingerprint across his face. Again, if this is why you definitely want to, whenever possible, have the models on a base so that you can touch the base to move it around when you're priming and getting the different angles of the model because you want it, it's 360, right? You want to prime it all over. And then also, or if it's not on a base, some people like put them on blue tack on a popsicle stick or whatever method you want to use, so that you can move it around and do that properly. Also be aware, when you're putting it on boxes, cardboard boxes or lids or things or paper, right? When it cures, it's wet and it will stick to the cardboard or the paper lid underneath it. So you want to, while don't just come back an hour later and you're like peeling it off and you're peeling all the stuff. It's okay. You could just scrape it off. But really, while it's still a little wet, you can go get a paper towel or wear that glove, right, and move the models around so that when it's curing, it doesn't stick to
yeah.
the paper or cardboard beneath it.
So I tend to want to leave them outside so that the fumes can essentially dissipate outside while it's drying for about 4 hours before I would ever even think about trying to paint
Please
these
leave it
models. Yes,
outside with the
but it
fumes. Do
but now
not
it
bring
needs
it
to be
in.
left outside, but not in the sun though, right? So this
Yes.
is a well ventilated area that is not in direct sunlight. So it can be
Same
difficult
as
for people to actually
before.
find places to be able to do that.
Yep, you need some shade that will be there 4 hours later or
Yeah,
5 hours later, or however long you have out there. I've made the mistake of, oh, I'll let it cure here. It's in the shade, and I come back 2 hours later, and the sun moved across the sky, and shit. I the model's now ruined. You cannot be in the direct sun; it will warp and melt it. All right, so it's dried, it's primed, it's ready to go. At that point, you're ready to paint it. Again, the big thing we'll cover in a different video is color theory, how to pick a color for your army, but we're not going to go into that too much here. You get your paints ready. Again, GW paints are excellent paints. I do highly recommend it. The vast majority of the paints I use are GW paints, but there are other fantastic paint brands out there as well, a whole bunch of them, and I encourage you to go explore them. A lot of different methods and a lot of different types of paint and a lot of modern paints, but we're not going to go over that right now. But you will need to buy some paints, and then of course you will need your paint brushes. And GW sells some of those as well, don't they, Evan?
yes. So there's lots of different shapes and sizes here, but essentially they're going to break them down here for different purposes. Um, the traditional Games Workshop method is that you're going to base coat, which is just you're kind of applying like a bit of a thicker paint as that first layer, and then you're going to wash to essentially kind of apply like a dark shade that's going to go fade into the recesses. It's a thinner paint, and it's going to make everything darker. Then you're going to start highlighting. You're going to add lighter colors to start adding contrast. And the reason you're doing this is you're kind of overemphasizing the differences of the different like levels of the model to make them look more three-dimensional, to kind of add contrast, and it makes them appear more realistic in the way that something that would be a flat color would have lots of different lighting kind of on it in real life. So that's what you kind of use these different types of paint and these different brushes for. But that's, I mean, this is a skill that it takes
And it's a
decades
little
potentially to master.
intimidating.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
intimidating.
I would encourage you to look up again, Battle Ready. Right, if this is your
Battle ready.
first army, um, Games Workshop does have some great videos, some great standards showing how you could very quickly go from models assembled. This is the first thing you've ever painted to a battle ready standard, and some great videos on how what that means. And basically, it's just you don't need to be super detailed. You're not going to be the best painter in the world out of the gate. That's okay. You know what? The fact that you've bought your army, you assembled it, and you've got paint on it, you're already a community champion at that point, and you're going to make the game not only more fun for you, you're going to make it more fun for everybody else playing the game with you. But the fact that you got some paint on your models, so good job, good for you, because that's hard to do, right? Everyone's very busy and has a lot of time and energy, and this is a hobby, which means effort and energy to make that happen. So if you got some paint on your models, you're already your community champion at that point. So again, there's a lot of different paintbrushes. Don't be intimidated by it. You really don't need all of them. Again, look at some of the just tutorial beginning level videos. There's a ton of independent content creators who've made some great videos, tons of them out there, but also GW has some great videos as well. You really kind of need your standard brush, right? Your standard size brush here. There's a lot of different versions. There's a glazed brush, a dry brush. You really need a base brush to get going, depending on what you're doing. Other brushes are for other things, and other videos will cover that. You don't need all of them. You can buy the GW brushes. There's kind of the artificial brushes, kind of these STC here's, and then also the traditional, I believe they're horsehair brushes, but maybe they've changed that over the years. Maybe they're not anymore. And that's what the different colors are representing here, and such. Again, they are very high quality brushes. I have used GW brushes many times over the years. I've also used a lot of other brushes from Hobby Lobby, Michael's, other hobby stores as well that are also very good, and you can buy online. So you do want a good quality brush though. If you buy, some of the really cheap, $2, $1 brushes, it's going to be a lot harder. You want a quality brush that's going to hold a point at the end. It is going to have the appropriate amount of bristles. Um, yeah, you're going to be hard pressed to find standard painting brushes for less than like I don't know, maybe $6, $7, even still, right? It's not going to be $1 brushes. There are some exceptions with dry brushes or other kind of specialty brushes you can use from other things, but it's still going to cost. You make sure you have a good brush. At least your standard brush you're going to use for the majority of things. Make sure you have a good brush. You take care of it. Make sure you clean it and rinse it and wash it out between the uses, and because it can last a very long time as long as you take care of
Yeah.
it. Anything else for paintbrushes, Evan? It's kind of the basics.
No, I think so. That's the good cover of paintbrushes. There's lots of places to get them. You get what you pay for. If you buy expensive brushes, then you need to understand how to take care of them, right, to get the value out of that. Or
Mm-hmm.
you can buy cheap brushes and treat them like garbage, like I do.
And both methods work for different people. It just
Yes.
depends on your method. So you got your paintbrush, and at that point, like I said, you're getting your paints. Make sure you research beforehand what is the color scheme and palette of your army and what you're doing. Look for inspiration out there. You don't need to do this from scratch. You could do the GW paint scheme they have in the artwork. You can go
Yeah.
online. There's tons of talented artists. Definitely be inspired. Don't just figure it out on the fly. Play a little bit planning in advance what you want them to look like will go a long way. Ask your friends for help. Right? I bet you if you're watching this video, that means you're part of a community somewhere, or you're part of the Old World Legends community. Loads of people out there who'd be more than happy to help you, to give you tips, post pictures of your models, ask questions. The community is awesome. People love sharing how they do things, so just ask.
Yeah,
It'd
and
be
you can
great.
join our Discord and link below and ask in our modeling section about how to do certain things.
Yep, definitely happy to help people. So then you start painting your army, you get it to at least battle ready, and then off you go. There are definitely more things you can do, but we wanted to at least cover the
Yeah.
basics here on how you from, hey, I opened a box, I built an army list, I picked an army, I built a list, I picked up some models. How do I go from opening the box to getting it to kind of that battle ready standard to put in front of the tabletop and start rolling dice and having fun with friends? Again, I'd encourage you, some people want to wait till their army's painted to start rolling dice. I'd encourage you to roll dice as soon as your armies are assembled.
Yeah.
Because painting will take time, and there's nothing more motivating than playing game with your friends, having fun, rolling dice. Because then you're going to schedule the next game, and you want to get back out there, and then you want to, and then that will give you the motivation to paint your army by playing with your friends, playing with the community, with your list up there. I'd encourage you as soon as it's assembled, get out there and start having fun.
Yeah, I tend to kind of go through a cycle of I play about one game a week, and play it with the army that I've currently been working on. So I kind of bring the latest thing that I've gotten up to stuff, and just start to get with the base coat of a bunch of different things, and then bring them to the first battle, and then by the second battle, maybe I've got the the highlighting and layering done, and by the third battle that I brought them to, maybe I've got the basing done as well. But I spend a ridiculous amount of time painting as many models as possible. So if you're not doing it that fast, don't worry. But it's fun to do it, intermittently with the playing. So you play with the model, paint them a little bit, play with them again. It's great. By the end of and if you're like me, by the time you're done, you're like, well, new army.
It just depends. Some people like to go back and expand the existing army. So, all right, I think we've covered the basics there. And like we said, if you've gotten this far in the video and you like the content we're providing you, it'd be great if you could, like, share, subscribe. It definitely helps people find Old World Legends in the channel and helps us grow the community. Evan, anything else?
Yeah, just one more thing. Stay legendary.
That's going to get really old really fast. All right, thanks, everybody. Bye.